A recap of last week's episode. We were also made to learn our timetable and recite it verbatim without mistakes. If we did make mistakes, the corporal punishment would be beatings. Having gone through what was frequently torture, as our mother's patience wasn't gentle and nurturing, I began to excel in school from middle on. That teacher made me realize that I had a way of telling stories with a descriptive nature that came naturally. Unbeknownst to this teacher, I knew I had a supercharged imagination. I also began to excel in my vocational assignments, which were electronics. When my teachers realized I had already received training from my stepfather, it made my classes easier, which propelled me and one of my good friends, Latanya Wallace, to become head of our class and receive a mayoral ceremony and award, assigned college prep classes, and gain entry into the work-study program my senior year. That summer, I was also surprised when educators told me I was selected for Morgan State University's summer engineering program. But all the good news and accolades were being overshadowed by the lack of support from any parental figure. When you beat a child into submission, telling him or her that getting an education is the most important thing and that he or she must excel in school, a lot of the luster becomes lacking if you don't show up. Stand up in support of their efforts. For all of our accomplishments, mine and my siblings, I can't remember a time when our parents actually showed up to support us except for high school graduation. Even as I applied for student loans and needed $500 to stay in school during the final quarter of my freshman year in college, I asked my mother if she could send the money to me. She lied and said that she didn't have it. No matter how much I excelled, my parents didn't support me. But when they needed to be driven somewhere or wanted money because I was working, their interest was suddenly piqued. See, as my siblings and I became older and our parents couldn't torture us as they did when we were younger, we began filling the roles like indentured servants. My sister did all of the cooking and cleaning, and because I got my driver's license at age 16, I became the driver, the chauffeur. What they also didn't know was that I wore designer clothes because I had been hustling since I was 12 years old, carrying people's groceries, and later at a real job, and I bought what I wanted to wear with my own hard-earned money. 3 specific things have stayed with me all these years. The first was a creative drawing competition using AutoCAD, a computer-aided design and drafting software. Second was this beautiful Black Asian teenage boy who was mesmerizing. And the third was me receiving an award and doing a speech at the awards banquet dinner at the end of the program. Many kids from all over were a part of the engineering program that summer at Morgan State University. If you asked me how many there were, I couldn't tell you. The housing, meals, and curriculum were already set up for us. This taller brother in particular had a subdued personality. It was like they were good looking and they knew it, yet not wanting to be bothered. But I knew, knowing me, that would not last for long, especially them being around me and knowing the magnetism I had towards boys. As we all began to know each other, my subtle yet extremely outgoing nature made many people curious about who I was. I dressed with style and bright clothing, so my dark complexion stood out. At the time, I didn't even realize that I was so competitive, but in everything we did, I made sure I stood out and was being watched. I was 17, and this guy was my second male crush. I thought about him for many years. Now his face is just a blur to me, but I remember that moment we had like it was yesterday, adding to my adulation for red bones with long hair. During the summer engineering program, we were introduced to AutoCAD. The instructors told us how the software worked and instructed us on how to use it. They also said whoever had the best design using the AutoCAD program would receive an award at the closing dinner banquet. I learned how to maneuver through the program and began drawing one of my favorite video game characters, At that time, Mario of Super Mario Brothers. I was selected as the contest winner once everyone had turned in their drawings. Knowing that my efforts would be futile, I still begged her to come to the awards banquet, but she again told me that she didn't have time to go to no dinner. I was saddened by this. With all the disappointments they enacted on us as a kid, and even into my later teenage years, I always made reservations for them. That whole day, all I thought about was how lonely I would feel there by myself with no support from the family. As the days crept by, dwindling down to the day of the banquet dinner, I became even more fretful. I was sad, even though the other kids didn't know it. Watching and listening to them talk about all who were showing up for them made me depressed. Everything I had accomplished that summer went down the drain, as I felt like it was a waste because my family wasn't there to support me. As I walked through the double doors of the building and looked around at the round tables, perfectly set with blue tablecloths, dinnerware and chairs, and staffing putting the final touches on the stage and podium, I felt lost. I felt abandoned. I had no one cares about me, ran through my mind as I walked to any random empty table. A few of them came to sit by me, but it was as if I was stranded in the desert, looking at unsurmountable miles of sand to overcome and being inundated. I felt defeated. I felt invisible. As I sat at one of those tables, I began to stare at the door, wishing by some dumb luck or sheer chance that anybody would just show up for me. But that was just me being hopeful. With one last glance before making my way to the podium, I stared at the double doors, entranceway to the auditorium, hoping that someone was coming, but just running late. The doors never opened again. As I began placing one foot before the other, walking towards the stage, it felt like slow motion, and everyone's eyes were on me. When I got to the podium, I was awarded Best Drawing for AutoCAD and was asked to give a speech. I was dying inside. I slightly turned my head to the right in the direction of the door and watched diligently, hoping to see anyone coming through the doors at that point. During my speech, I told everyone why I had drawn Mario from the video game Super Mario Brothers and how much I loved playing the game. I told them I had always had an affinity for art and that learning was meaningful and made me come alive. Everyone clapped, and I then grabbed my award and proceeded back to my seat. It was as though I had traveled to an unknown city, didn't have a penny to my name, and knew no one. No one showed up. Being there with all these strangers and their families, and my family is missing in action, created anxiety and embarrassment. I watched the other kids laughing and talking with their families, and I felt truly abandoned. It was a feeling I had never felt before and something I wished for no one. Growing up, I felt neglected before and unloved and cared for. But that day was the worst. After all the beatings to do good in school, no one came in support of me doing well. At the end of the banquet, I had to catch the bus home, and it was a grueling ride. All these thoughts began running through my head. I became upset even more. I was angry. It was the longest bus ride returning to a house where I knew no one cared about me. Amit Ray says, "There are miracles and glory in every child. Our glory lies in empowering them to flourish their glory." Man, why couldn't I have parents such as Amit? Where would I be today? The following semester, I enrolled at Morgan State University with a concentration in communications. During one of my 200-level acting classes, my professor said that morning we would do a new warm-up. See, every morning we did a warm-up, but this morning was a totally different warm-up that we have never done before. This warm-up consisted of partnering with one other person. Once we were partnered, and my partner was the professor, we had to grab and hug each other very tightly to feel each other deeply. Suddenly, one of the female students began crying out loudly. As the female professor and I held each other, I thought, Why was this young lady crying? It wasn't until she began stating that her mom had died and she never got to hug her. It felt like I was gut punched with what she was feeling. Another female student also began crying, saying that she was pregnant and was afraid because she didn't have any support. As we stood there, it felt like the air in the room began feeling very heavy. The room, which was a theater, started getting warm. I felt a tear fall to my cheek. Suddenly, my professor began crying, and as she wept, she bellowed how her young son was her best friend. And now that he was getting older, she could feel that friendship getting weaker and weaker. She was saddened by this. As I listened to everyone, all the guys in the class too, I began crying. But it was a cry I had never experienced before. I had carried around the baggage of my father not being in my life and how I detest what he did. And then my mother and my stepfather, how they treated us, how they tortured us growing up. And I bawled. I bawled as I held my professor as tightly as I could. I too never really grabbed and held my mother like that. And it was as if I was hugging for the entire life I had missed out on, just hugging. I cried long and hard. We all did. My professor held me as I became so emotional I could not stand. She comforted me, and that was the only time I felt what it meant to be mothered. I felt loved. I felt cared for. I felt seen. Those 60 minutes were and have been the pivotal point in my life, and it is one of the reasons I can be here today telling you my story. Welcome to Journey 365. I'm your host, Patrick A. Kelly. So before we get started, please join us in an open prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight. We thank you for all that you have enabled us to do and all that you will enable us to continue to do moving into the future. We thank you for everyone who has supported us, those who are seen and unseen. We thank you, dear Father, for blessing us and also for allowing the show to grow exponentially, dear Father. Lord, we ask that you continue to send people to us who are looking to be delivered, who are looking to share their journey, and through them sharing their journey, be delivered. Amen. Welcome to Journey 365. I'm your host, Patrick A. Kelly. I want to thank you all so much for joining us another night. Oh my goodness, we're on episode 7, and I am so excited. Last week, episode 6 was Abandoned and the Love of a Stranger. Wow, I want to thank you all for your support on that. Those things that happened to me were 2 specific things that stayed with me till today. They were very, very profound. When parents, when you're out there, giving your kids all this knowledge, and, you're telling them to go to school, you're telling them to respect their elders, you're telling them to stay away from certain people. You also have to support them. Do not let them go through their childhood and their teenage years without your support, because that can affect them greatly and it stays with them all their life, just as it did me. So, if you're encouraging your kids out there to, go for it, to do their thing and to learn and to, become great, then you also have to be by them, supporting them and cheering them on. So, that was an episode that was really dear to my heart. I mean, all the other episodes are dear to my heart. Also, we talked about that incident in my level 2 acting class with my professor, and how us doing that exercise caused me to finally tap into my emotions and finally deal with a lot of the issues and stuff like that I had with my real father, who lives in Jamaica. We never had a relationship, and I blamed him for that because I felt as though that he was the adult. He never did anything for me, for us personally. And I'm not saying this to say that he's a bad person, because he's not. I've met him a few times, and he's a really great guy. Mind you, he and I am the spitting image of him, as you would say. I guess that's an old saying. But I look exactly like him. My dad is probably like in his early 70s now, and he still looks like he's, like 60 or something like that. So, that's where me and my sister Donna got the genes from. But yeah, going back to, dealing with a lot of balled up emotions. A lot of our young men out there, we need somebody to grab a hold of them and give them a big hug and tell them how much you love them, tell them how much you care about them, because that is so important. And that's why you have many of them who are out here in the streets who don't really have a role model, someone to look up to, and they're being raised by themselves. They're being raised by other people who don't know what they're doing. They're being taught all these different things that can have an adverse effect on them as they're growing up, especially when they get into society, because society is unforgiving. So, whenever you get a chance, I don't care if it's not your kid, as long as you're doing it in the right way, please encourage them. If you know them, if you all are family members, please make sure that you're supporting any and everything that they're doing, all of their interests, and grab them and give them a hug and tell them that you love them. That is so important for their upbringing, for them, going or coming into themselves, Also, I wanted to talk about the stigma behind homosexuality. And I was having a conversation with God the other day, and I was asking God, I was like, Lord, I said, is homosexuality wrong? And God placed a notion in my head that the initial intention for homosexuality was to be like, how you have like caviar as a delicacy. It was something for men who did things like that, who did have an attraction to other men, for them to participate in that while still having their families, and everything was supposed to be on the hush-hush. Now that homosexuality is so in your face, it's putting a spotlight on the act. And thus, people who practice some form of homosexuality, maybe bisexuality or what have you, or it may be just something that they indulge in from time to time, like a delicacy, they don't want that attention being placed on them. And as these mannerisms and these ideas are being put into society, it scares them, and it gives them or brings them unwanted attention, unwanted anxiety. So that's why the practice of homosexuality, even from tribes in Africa and so forth, well, not necessarily Africa, because tribes in Africa, it was a part of their culture, so it was out in the open. But as far as in pop culture and in our society, men and a lot of women out there who are practicing homosexuality, bisexuality, and stuff like that, they don't want people to know that they're doing that, because one, they're afraid. Two, they probably haven't owned up to who they are as a person. So this was the explanation that, God gave me as far as homosexuality. But for those of you out there who are gay, who are bisexual, who don't really know who you and what you are, please don't let people say that you are perverted or you're going to go to hell, because you're not. God is all love. And if you are out there living your life right and being the best person that you can be and helping others to do the same, then if you love someone of the same sex, that is just love. Love is that. It's pure, and it's simple, and it's unadulterated, and there's no confusion in that. So love yourself. Help others to love themselves as well, and don't pay attention to all the negativity and the nastiness that may come your way, because these are just people who are dealing with a lot of trauma and a lot of issues, and they're just looking for somebody else who may have an issue that they can demonize, so they don't have to deal with their own. They don't have to deal with their own issues and hurt. I want to thank you again. For supporting at Journey 365 podcast, which is the @JRNY 365. Like I said, we're on our 7th episode. The 7th episode, which is titled Celibacy and Abstinence from the Beginning. And I am talking about my history in practicing celibacy and abstinence and all the craziness and withdrawals I went through. Y'all, it was like I was literally addicted to, drugs, and I was going through withdrawal and all the craziness I went through. But I thank God for delivering me from that, where I can now say that I am not having sex. I'm totally abstaining. I'm not even dating, and I feel great. God have given me the ability to be able to be by myself and not be alone or not feel lonely. There are times, especially on the weekends, where I love being at home and laying up in the sofa and binging or just laying there just talking to God, you know what I'm saying? Or, talking to my family members and stuff like that. So I think it's so important for you to get to a stage in your life of comfortability where you're comfortable with yourself. You're not letting other people define you. You're not, at someone else's beck and call. May it be, running around in the streets. May it be dating or trying to find someone to have sex with. May it be, having to find all the hottest spots. May it be having to, look a certain kind of way, dress a certain kind of way, and carry yourself a certain kind of way. May it be even editing yourself. Like at every moment, every step that you take, every breath that you take, you're constantly editing yourself because you're afraid of what people may think or what people may see or not see. So anyway, I thank you all again for supporting the @Journey 365 podcast. And without further ado, here is episode 7, Celibacy and Abstinence from the Beginning. Enjoy. I'm Patrick A. Kelly, and this is my journey chronicled by significant incidents in my life that made me who I am today. God was working on me before the beginning stages of my celibacy and abstinence, but I didn't know it. I was becoming impatient with people and losing attraction to them. I should have seen this beforehand, but back then I was too caught up in superficiality to recognize and understand God's work. The stages of becoming celibacy began rough, and there would be tumultuous days and nights ahead. I had become unattracted to guys and started dating women briefly. However, I was still unsatisfied with where I was in life. I was bored with the exact repetition of my sex life. I felt like something was missing, and I replaced that void with sex and attention. During that time, God kept talking to me, working on myself, but I wasn't listening. I would see signs through suggestive works, overhear others' conversations that would trigger a specific thought, or even hear my inner voice telling me to do this or not to do that, but I still wasn't listening. God would even come to me in dreams and premonitions. Still, at that time, I wasn't allowing myself the ability to interpret the visions and premonitions and put them into action. It was like I was a Windows Vista program trying to run on Catalina. I wasn't processing. Be that as it may, my path was already set, and my becoming celibate in abstinence was all a part of God's plan to help me work into my glory, my power bestowed by Him. It wasn't until after my first 6 months of abstinence that I began to understand what God was showing me in my dreams and the clues He would give me through hearing and seeing others. As I continued On this newfound journey, this discovery into my person, and ultimately giving up the ghost that would be my sex life, it simmered to a whimper, and my disinterest in sex became weary. I had ultimately become irritated with people and how everything had become so transactional and grifting when going on a date or simply meeting someone and getting to know them. I became increasingly unenthusiastic with the whole dating and getting to know people. Social media didn't make it any more accessible because it gave people the opportunity to embellish their person, which created a false sense of entitlement and exaggerated self-aggrandizement and encouraged and trafficked lies and identity theft mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. It was like someone or something transported me 20 years into the future, because I couldn't recognize what was happening before my eyes until it was too late. So I regressed further into my solitude, and not having sex became less of interest. But there would be times when I would have flare-ups that were so penetrable, it felt like my mind was going through a craving frenzy. I would do anything to relieve it. This craving would become so intolerable that I would relapse to needing a fix. I was an addict needing to feed or suffer the consequences, and I would oftentimes feel like I was losing my mind. I couldn't deny this craving, so I faltered and indulged. I began seeking out the right situations that were transactional and would give me exactly what I wanted when I wanted it. Selfishness would overtake me. My stubbornness guided my needs and wants to the point of capitulation. This went on a few times during my practice of celibacy. The first time I broke my commitment to celibacy and to abstain from sex weighed on me like having sex for the first time without marriage, and your conscience digs and preys on you because you spent your whole life in church, and you having sex without marriage goes against everything you were taught. And how I loathe being convicted for something I did that I knew was wrong. There were times I wasn't strong enough to help myself from being weak. And like all the trauma and other harmful things that had happened in my life, I overcame them through God's grace and mercy, giving me the will to withstand the sometimes overloading act of having sex. I had prayed to God for Him to give me the strength to withstand the urges of having sex and the craving that would lure me to all its fixings at any cost. But I would backslide yet again before I had the power to say no fully and hold true to my convictions. Holding this strength to resist sex, I wholeheartedly believe was a gift from God to help me pass 6 months of abstinence and stand with my head high and not be defeated. Once I had completed my 6 months of abstinence, I was both elated and astonished at the same time. I could not believe it. Here was a man who had to have sex at any cost, even if it was to do the deed outside, in a car, get a quickie at the movies, or in a dimly lit lounge. I had overcome a plethora of vices in one fell swoop. My disbelief of 6 months of abstinence turned into appreciation. Then I became self-absorbed, or even possessed with the idea of upping myself. It's a crazy thing, and I'm using the word crazy as an inference and not to demean the sensitivity of the word. But as soon as I had graduated from being a sex-craved addict to settling into my newfound solitude of abstinence, here comes temptation. People began coming out of the woodwork. Everything I had been interested in from the past sexually came front and center. Every person I would be attracted to was blatantly masquerading in front of my eyes, taunting and pulling at me. When I would stop visiting my usual hangout spots, favorite restaurants and lounges, and even a particular gym where I had been monitoring this guy I wanted to body, the voice of regret and remembrance tried to settle in my mind. Still, I now had the power from God to dismiss it. I knew it was only the devil making those suggestions because he wanted me to return to my old state of redundancy and addiction. My past weakness of big butts and legs for days, no matter who they were attached to, was the next thing that raised its ugly head. See, I had given the power to the idea and notion of my ideal type of a big butt and legs for days. And it had grown and cultivated through the years, stronger and stronger, until it not only defined me, but it could have been my destruction. I would stand for judgment, and it came very quickly because my becoming abstinent and had awakened the sleeping beast, coming at me in full force like a thief in the night, seeking to steal, kill, and destroy, were people I wanted to smash in the past, old flings, past relationships, and new temptations in the form of the ideal person I wanted to settle down with in the past. But God was on the job. God was and still is my abundant light who helped me to place my mind and thoughts into other things and not succumb to the wiles of the devil. Paraphrasing John 10:10. Insightfully, I become easily bored if I'm not constantly mentally stimulated. The repetition of being a single man in Atlanta and meeting all these people with facades to rival any magician's trick became unimpressive because I could see them coming from a mile away. So, by these scenarios and the actions of my willful disinterest, I regressed into my solemnity. As I settled into my newfound life of celibacy and abstinence, there were reenactments of a tug of war going on inside of me. See, I was still ultimately attracted to people. However, I wasn't having penetration sex with them when I often wanted to. But I would occasionally do a bump and grind here or there, or a masturbation session. Eventually, doing those things subsided the more my spirituality grew, and the idea of having sex, even masturbation, became less and less appealing. I would quickly become convicted, and the Spirit would tell me that my actions and the person weren't my path. Later, I grew into the understanding that although I was craving sex less and less, my body was still going through a withdrawal from intimacy. Not only was I not having sex, but I wasn't dating or even touching anyone at all. Years later, I learned that the reason my body was craving intimacy was because I was an empath, and connecting with people was essential for my being. In fact, the sense of touch, sight, smell, and hearing would give me so much joy, I preferred doing them with others over the act of sex. I especially loved touching people and even smelling them because that provided me with a plethora of information from them that I would store for later consumption. In the early mornings, sometimes between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., I would wake up and begin unpacking all the information I had collected the day prior. After uploading or unloading that information, I started interpreting what I saw, smelled, and heard, receiving truth through conversations with God and insight from reading people's eyes and body language. But doing this sometimes would scare me because I wouldn't be prepared for what truths lie ahead that often became overwhelming. Beginning my celibacy and abstinence with all my falter was one of the most exciting experiences I have encountered thus far. Starting from 38 to now 51 years old, I'm at the point where I'm practicing semen retention, sometimes lasting 3 to 4 weeks without masturbation. Still, I have gone over 10 years without relapse. My goal is to go 6 months to a year at a time without masturbation. I realized that the more semen I retained, the more insightful I was, the more powerful. I have a heightened connection with God, and my premonitions and dreams are more in-depth and detailed and touch on a broader spectrum. I can attest that since I overcame my sexual addiction and inability to overcome my sexual cravings, I am in tune with my surroundings more. God has helped me to channel my sexual energies into heightening my other abilities of discernment. My premonitions and spiritual dreams have increased, and I now see glimpses of the future. I can read and catch people's past. I have consciously traveled to other worlds, and my sight or third eye has become overactive, allowing me to experience things I could not explain if I tried to. I have walked into my destiny, and God has revealed my path and who I am. My days are a constant enlightenment, and ever since my transcendence, I feel a strength of power that was never there before. I'm much calmer and less quick to react, and I now listen with intention and purpose. My daily life is way better too. I am more calm. My blessings comes in waves where frequently they are abundantly overwhelming. The days themselves feel like blessings. The calmness over me is impressive, and I utterly enjoy my peace, solitude, and space. I have no one in my life who gives me unwanted destructive emotions. I don't get calls with constant negative after effects. And more people I know, even strangers, come to me for insight, or they give me positive insight themselves. I am always smiling, and I feel great. Just because others are inspired by me and feel compelled to become better than who they are, lets me know my calling and the ability to endure is preordained by God. At age 51, I stopped running from God, and I fully embraced my destiny to the calling to be the message. To be the message and to do this podcast and the show, I had to lay myself bare as I'm doing now. So you can understand that this isn't a game at all. God is using me. He is using me to be the message for you. And he says, come as you are and be delivered. But to do that, you have to bear yourself to him and everyone because of our strength. God don't give us more than we can handle. And if he puts you through something like what I've gone through, or what you have gone through, or what you're going through now, it means that you are strong enough to handle it. And he didn't give you that. He didn't give you all of that blessing for you to hold on to it. He gave it to you so you can share it with others so that they too can be blessed and delivered and know the love of God. So I thank you so much for being here with me right now, because you have had so many other things that you could be doing. Thank you for starting this journey with me, and thank you for your support. I can't wait to meet each and every one of you to hear your story, for my continued deliverance and for the deliverance of others. Good night. Patrick A. Kelly owns the copyright in and to all content in and transcripts of At Journey 365 podcast, with all rights reserved, as well as his right to publicity. You are welcome to share the transcript up to a maximum of 400 words in media articles such